Very happy today to welcome back Eben, class of 2007. Ecovative is a story that I've heard ever since I joined Rensselaer around 2006, 2007. It's one of those startup stories that you love to hear involving professors and students and classes where education and innovation happen. Eben's going to kick things off with telling the story of Ecovative. So welcome, Eben. Thank you very much for joining us today, and welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to get to speak with everyone here. I started right where all of you are today. So today what I'd like to do is give you a brief background on Ecovative, tell you a little bit about the problems we're addressing, why we're doing the work we do, the kind of journey I took to get where I am today, and along the way I just want to share a couple of lessons on entrepreneurship that I found really helpful. For those of you considering becoming entrepreneurs or doing this, I highly encourage you to do it. For those of you that want to work on real problems that affect the world, I highly, highly encourage you to do it. It's really hard work, but it's also really rewarding, and you can make a difference, and it's happening all the time, and we need more people doing it. So let's just start with the problem statement. You know, you've got a big life ahead of all of you, and you should think about how you want to spend your time on this blue orb we all live on. I like what Buckminster Fuller calls it, Spaceship Earth, because it really puts into context to me the fragility of this beautiful ecosystem we're traveling on. And it also, if I think of Earth as a spaceship with self-repairing systems like our ecosystems that keep us healthy, make oxygen, make water, make all the materials we need to live, it also helps put into perspective like how important it is to kind of take care of our spaceship because we are rocketing through a very cold, very large, very big galaxy. Let's start with history. Like, how do we get to where we are today? Technology's been moving really fast. So humans have been around for about 100,000 years. Past 2,000 years have been like really fast in terms of social, government, political evolution. In the past 100, it's been astronomical in terms of technology. This has touched a lot of domains from information technology to the material world. I'm going to focus on the material world today. And the 1950s were really powerful. They were a time of optimism, time of uplift. They started some of the big projects like going to the moon. Also brought us some incredible materials like nylon and rayon and styrofoam. All of these were developed during this period. And they absolutely transformed the way we lived and were basically viewed as how we should be in the future. And it was a massive move away from the natural world. These technologies are incredible. Plastic's really important. It's very important in many applications throughout our lives. But many of these chemical innovations, material innovations came with tremendous environmental costs. And you're, I'm sure, all aware of this, whether it's the news you see around plastic collecting in our oceans or just like go for a walk in Troy and like look at the park. Look at the styrofoam or the plastic you'll see in the park. And so even if we work really hard as humans to collect recyclable plastics, for instance, they still end up in our ecosystem. And so while this technology has been tremendously impactful in a positive manner, it's changed how we live, it's also created this incredible cost for our planet that we really haven't captured in the past. Arthur C. Clarke has a quote that I really love. And he said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. You know, he was a visionary. He wrote in the 60s and he wrote about things like geopositioning satellites, right? That we're going to fucking launch satellites into space, and they're going to tell you where you are on planet Earth using the time dilation of a light beam reaching you or an electron beam reaching you, right? He was talking about the iPhone when he wrote these quotes. And he was right. These are incredible technologies that have changed our life. We can do things that were unimaginable 100 years ago. But if you look at this table, and I've borrowed this graphic from Jason Kelly of Ginkgo Bioworks, one of the leaders in the bioengineering space, and you think, what's the most impressive piece of technology on this table? Well, you might not gravitate towards the computer anymore. It looks like it's a little, one of those thicker, older MacBooks. But you know, you've got camera, you've got headphones, you've got iPhones. It's the plant, right? The plant is the thing on the table that's the most impressive piece of technology. It's literally molecular nanotechnology. It's taking photons, these little ethereal packets of light. It's turning them into a material on your desk. If you take a little sprig of it and put it in water, it'll start growing again. Like, it beats the computer hands down. And this is the key insight for me when starting Ecovative and many people in the sector, which is biology will be the general purpose technology for the next 100 years. And by working with biology, we can both create incredible new materials or even living objects without the environmental consequences that came from the way we introduced plastics to the material world. So in many ways, it's both returning to the old way, working with nature, but also insight we've learned over the years. You're able to unlock what I think of as like alien technology. Like natural technology is just like this incredible thing that's around us that we can actually utilize. So from my view, I like to riff on Arthur C. Clarke. I hope he'd like this. I think he would if he was still here today. And say any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from nature. So I want to give you a little history around the start of Ecovative. I give this talk periodically externally. I rarely actually have the opportunity to give it to folks who are at RPI, and I'm happy to do so because the story actually does go all the way back to RPI, and it goes back to the Change the World competition and an incredible professor in my life. But let me start here. This was right when we were getting going, 2006, 2007. This is a photo that was taken for Popular Science, and it shows Gavin and I in the lab with these raw materials. And like, in some ways, I think this is what the picture of success looks like right at this early stage. Like, this looks sciencey. I'm wearing a bouffant. Like, we've got cool stuff growing in trays. But what I wanted to share in this class is like, this is the reality. We graduated from RPI. We rented a 200 square foot office in the business incubator. This business incubator is for like people doing stuff on laptops. We're like cooking up ag waste and other smelly things in the basement, going up to the shared kitchen to get water for our science experiments. And like, we need more space. We don't have any money. And one day Gavin's like, hey, this closet door, like, it seems to go to a really big empty space at the bottom of the basement, the business incubator at RPI. And we like both looked at each other, we're like, should we ask if we can rent it? And we're like, we don't have the money. And we're like, you know what? We're just going to clean it up. So this is me cleaning this whole space up. This is that picture he was taken right to the right of me in the old dark room. So this was actually the old RPI dark room, which we converted into a wet lab. But the punchline here is like, our place was a mess. Like, we're wearing bouffants in that picture, but we never wore bouffants. Like, we're looking all sciencey, but we really didn't know what was going on. And then we did really need this space, and we put it to work. We cleaned it out. We wanted, at the time we were building a building insulation, we needed to dry large panels of insulation. And so we built a giant oven down here. We used hair dryers that we got from Walmart, $10 a piece, plugged into all these different outlets in the basement to like dry these panels. The fire alarms kept going off. We kept telling people it was popcorn burning in our microwave. Finally, the fire department came in January. The entire incubator was evacuated, and it's all the other companies like looking at us very angrily. And the administration had finally figured out, not only had we like squatted in the basement of the business incubator, we built some like things you probably shouldn't have put in place. So why am I telling you all this? Because I think if we had not taken these steps, Ecovative would not be here today. We were at like a really critical, scrappy juncture in our scale-up growth, and these are steps we needed to do. And the first lesson I want to share with you is ask forgiveness. Don't ask permission as an entrepreneur. We went to, I believe, the Claude Rounds at the time, who ran facilities, and we begged and we pleaded, and I pleaded all the way up to Dr. Jackson, like, please don't kick us out, please, please, please. And ultimately, with some major changes in safety, we were able to lease the space, we were able to pay the school to use the space, and we were able to keep that lab space. And this pilot space was critical for the next journey in Ecovative's story. So, you know, you don't want to be outrageously dangerous. You don't want to create human health risks. Like, we should never play with people's lives. But within reason, there are a lot of stupid rules around you. And I'm sure you feel that now as students. And so if you have a good reason, right, you are working on something important in the world, to bend or break some of these rules, think about it in this context. At the time we were developing a building insulation, we thought that would be the highest good for this technology. And we were really struggling with funding. And we had the opportunity to participate in a conference, the Green Challenge in the Netherlands. This is a really rare event. It's still going on. For those of you that are interested in the future, it's a great way to fund your business. And we flew to the Netherlands. We couldn't believe it. These Dutch people called us up after we applied for it. They said, you know, you're a finalist, come and present. And like, we were living on $25,000 a year investment and eating ramen. And so this is like a massive step change for us in potential capital. We went, we presented. We did not think we were going to win, right? Like, I stood on stage and I promised this Dutch foundation that we were going to put mushroom insulations in everyone's walls. It was going to save CO2. We were going to scale up a production process, showing those like pictures of the business incubator to make it look like we had a bigger space than we had. And like, unbelievably, like truly unbelievably, we won this competition. And they just give you a €500,000 check. Like, they're like, okay, go do it. You know, keep us reported. We want reports every quarter, but go do it. And so these are the three co-founders, Ed Brokaw, Gavin McIntyre on the side, and then me in the middle. And, you know, Gavin looks really happy, right? Like, he's got a big smile on his face. But you can see my gears have already shifted. If you could really zoom into my eyes here, you would just see I'm in total abject fear. Because I've already moved from like the, oh my God, we won, to like, holy crap, like we got to build a mushroom insulation factory. Like they gave us the money to do it. We said we'd do it. Like, how are we going to freaking do this? And so it was this mix of like, be careful what you wish for. And again, this is all around a building insulation. So what do? We return to the United States. We get off the plane. It's really great. People are calling us, congratulating us. And a few weeks later, I get a call from a casting director saying, I'm trying to make this building insulation for a TV show. And I'll just show you the result. Hopefully this plays and everyone can hear it. I'll tell you the backstory here.
I think the audio isn't coming through, but the video seems okay.
So this is a clip from CSI. I'm sorry the audio didn't play for the group. And this is basically them describing how Mycelium insulation produced by Ecovative solves the crime. This aired on national television. Like you couldn't ask for better earned advertising for what we're doing, right? And this was kind of like crazy because now we've got this capital to build a mushroom insulation factory. For some reason, people are calling us being like, hey, I want to put mushroom insulation in my attic. My grandmother's cold, we're like, oh, great, customer discovery, like product market fit. And with all this like momentum, I promised the Dutch people I'm going to build a mushroom insulation factory. I've got this ad running on national television about mushroom insulation. What do you think we did? Change direction. It's called a pivot, right? In Silicon Valley, it's called a pivot. But there's a real reason, which is we realized, okay, building insulation is a good idea. There's a real product market fit here, but it's really hard. There's regulations. It's defined as a very high volume, low margin industry. We're like a scrappy little startup. Like we got to get a product out into the world. Like we got to show some traction around this science experiment. And so we dug deep. We're like, well, what are we trying to do in the world? Like, why do we pick insulation? Energy efficiency for building, reducing CO2 emissions, the pollution associated with construction. Like these were all our motivators in replacing styrofoam. And we changed our thinking. We said, well, where else is styrofoam a problem? And that brought us to protective packaging, which was the total opposite. It's a small product. It's got fast product life cycles, and compostability, which is a key element of a natural material like Mycelium materials, was a value proposition in this space. And we could make 100 of them in the basement of the business incubator and start selling them, which is what we did. And so we ended up pivoting from building insulation and launched mushroom packaging 2010 and acquired our first customers like Steelcase and Dell after that. And I had to call up those wonderful Dutch people and say, please send the money. I'm so sorry, we're doing something different. And they listened to me and they listened to the reasons and they wired the money. And that is how we kind of got our first leg up. This would be a good time now to describe a little bit about what we're doing here. So we're using Mycelium to both synthesize small compounds. We've done with biological fermentation since the 1970s, making insulin in yeast. Now we make lots of different biological compounds and chemical compounds in cells. What nature does really well, though, is both synthesize small molecules and assemble them into structures. So this is why wood is such a great biomaterial. This is why ivory is such a great biomaterial. This is why leather is such a coveted biomaterial. And so Mycelium really puts both of these things together. And this time lapse you're seeing is exactly that. You're seeing these mycelial fibers start as pinpricks that are almost too small to see with the naked eye, and grow through and around a mixture of low-cost ag material like wood chips to effectively glue them together, both like digest them and glues them. And so this is the core basis we use to make our packaging and many of our composite materials. So the lesson from all that is, if you get new data, our data in this case was like, insulation is going to kill us. We're not going to make progress on that. It's not a market we're going to be able to address with testing, scale up, access to capital, et cetera. Pick a new direction. Pick a new direction, even if someone gave you a $500,000 check to go in that direction. Pick a new direction if you got a free infomercial running on national TV, right? It's not important about how you got there. What's important is the decision you take in the moment for your future. You only control what happens to you next. You have no control of how you got to where you were at this moment, right? So you always want to be taking new decisions and paying attention to the data in front of you. So then, what do we do after we won?
We're at Ecovative headquarters. We've been running for 36 minutes and 12 seconds. This is the first trial run of our manufacturing system. Jason, pan up there. Let's get that auger going right there. What we've got here is a fully continuous process. We're taking cotton gin trash. We're moving it up to our blancher. Our blancher is then continuously pasteurizing it on a 30-minute cycle where it's falling into our tray filler. We've got our trays being UV'd and sterilized, filled, and liquid inoculated. We are transforming cotton waste into green slate in just 20 minutes. 1, 2, 3, steam! All right.
Okay, so I wanted to share that because even though we pivoted, we were making packaging in that space. We built it. You know, we told those folks we were going to build a mushroom factory, and we did, and was super proud of that. I think it's really important in the world of physicality to actually build these things and make it. So that line I just showed you is like super primitive. It worked. We shipped product from that line to our first customers. We shipped a steel case in Dallas. It proved out a lot of our key hypotheses about the process, but it was made out of scrap. Like the thing that was making the steam was an asparagus blancher we got for $10,000 out of like a food factory. The steam generator was from some like backyard shop in Alabama. You could probably tell that the hopper holding the ag waste was plywood and duct tape, and the auger is just sitting on a concrete floor. Like none of these are things you should do to build a manufacturing facility, but getting the whole prototype out there, that was what allowed us to go from, you know, a $500,000 using $13 or $14 million to build a business. Lesson 3 is just build it. And I would also put this in the context of prototyping. So often when you have an idea, you're like, oh, I have this great idea. I'd love to make it, but I don't have any of the parts to make it. Like maybe it's got a microprocessor in it. And one of the things I learned at RPI, and I still practice in my life, is, well, make a paper prototype of it. Making a new kind of app, just draw a picture of it on a piece of paper and hand it to someone and see how they use it. You know, make it out of a cardboard box next. Make it 3D. You know, put some Play-Doh on it. You know, to show where where the user might grab it. Like it's okay if it's really horrible, because the hard part is actually starting that design innovation loop. Once you start building something, you can improve on it. You can see the problems. You can see the opportunities, and you can go from there. And this is really important too. All the things I'm describing were really hard. That moment at Ecovative's life was critical. You know, we had like 7 or 8 employees, huge pressure from customers. You know, $500,000 sounds like a lot of money, but like when you're paying 7 or 8 people and you rented a warehouse with a 7-year lease, like, you know, the time was on. We had a very limited amount of time. And I love that video, which I had to go way into the archives to find, because everyone was having a blast. You know, we were all working 12 or 18 hours a day, but it was like the best thing we were doing. And it was that energy that got us over the line as well. If we didn't have that energy, you know, you wouldn't have made it. And you can't have that energy if you don't legitimately have fun. And I'll tell you, there's no reason not to have fun in what you do. It's just, you literally produce a better work product for it. It should be required. I'll tell you a little bit more about the Mycelium biofabrication platform, which is how we describe what we do. And then I'd love to see if there's any questions from the group. Over the years, we've used this technology to make massive structures. We grew a 40-foot tall tower in Brooklyn for a group called The Living. We made all these bricks in Troy, New York. And this architect had this vision of building this 40-foot tower, which was a cool music and art space, which was a great demonstration of like, how big can you go as an architectural element? We've created design and interior objects through our GROW program. So this allows artists and designers to get a bag of dehydrated material. If you want one, you can buy one online, grow.bio. You add water and you can grow an object. So making lampshades is not a huge business for us, but Danielle Trophy, a very talented artist in Brooklyn, built a business around creating these. Her work showed up in Hotel Brooklyn and other both hotels and people's homes. And I have these at home, they're lovely. Over the past 5 years, we've been pushing the limits of what you can do with Mycelium, so making squishy foams, leather-like textiles. This is a leather we developed and licensed. Very much like the skin of an animal. And most recently, we've really been focusing in on food. In a couple of weeks, you'll be able to buy our plant-based bacon in Albany, New York, from our subco, Atlas Food Co. I want to talk a little bit about food and leather because most of what you've probably heard about Ecovative is around plastics replacement. We broadened our mission a few years ago to include reducing plastic pollution and reducing animal slaughter. The reason for that is twofold. One, Mycelium is uniquely suited for replacing animal materials. So like we can make the best non-animal based skin in the world right now. We can make the best non-animal plant-based meat in the world right now. But two, animals are really hard on the planet. I grew up farming in central Vermont. I raised pigs. I slaughtered pigs for 15 years. I raised cows. I raised chickens. It was a small crop farm. It was beautiful. Doing this was a cultural way of life, and it was net productive for that area, right? There wasn't a higher purpose for that land. But factory farming is horrible, and I had a real blind spot to the amount of CO2 emissions, methane emissions, particularly as it relates to cows, as well as things like nitrogen escaping into the ocean that really mess up our ecosystem. And so, again, there's a business reason, technical business reason, like we can make something no one else can make better, and we can do it in a space where by doing so we can have the biggest lever to impact positivity for the planet. And so that's kind of why we're in food right now. I love this as an example again on prototyping. So this photo I showed 2 years ago, December 5th of this year. This will be 2 years ago, the first I publicly showed this image. This is a prototype of bacon. So in a couple of weeks, you'll be able to buy this bacon at Honest Weight in Albany. I hope you do. I hope you love it. For everything we understand, this is literally the best plant-based bacon in the world. It's eerily like a pork-based bacon. But this picture I'm showing you looked really good, but was horrible. So I stood on stage, I announced to the world we're gonna make plant-based bacon. I'd eaten the bacon. We used our leather strain, right? So you couldn't chew the stuff when you were done. But it was like, yeah, that's the idea. Like rather than using a leathery mushroom to make leather, we're gonna use a meaty mushroom to make bacon. Like that's the prototype, right? And so we made the prototype, we fried it up, we all ate it, it sucked. And then we used the visual to help the audience understand like, oh, I get it. Like they're gonna make bacon. And so it took 2 years from sharing this prototype that didn't even work as bacon to get that bacon on the shelf, which is actually like really, really fast. But if I hadn't shared a prototype and made a prototype, it either never would have happened or would have taken way, way longer. So just like big picture, we spent the last 10, 13 years now partnering and trying to make materials that make the planet a better place, trying to use biology as technology to enable that as a fundamental driver, and ultimately get to as much scale as we possibly can to drive the impact. I have one last lesson I want to share, though. And this one's, I think, probably the most important for everyone to hear. It's simple. Everyone around you is struggling. It's your peers, it may be your parents, it may be your siblings, it may be your professors. But I think it's really important, especially with what's going on in the world today, that you remember this. And for those of you that consider becoming entrepreneurs, and particularly if you're going to devote your life to working on one of these hard problems, so you're not going to make email faster. You're not going to make it easier to set up a calendar invite. You're not going to incrementally improve the audio quality of this Zoom chat. If you choose this path, you're going to do something really hard. It's also really important to the world. And it's really important we get as many people as possible working in these dimensions. And the last part of this story for me is I wouldn't be speaking to you today if I hadn't started on this path. And I wouldn't be speaking to you today if I didn't have a professor in my life, Bert Swersey, who really, I'd be honest with you, like pushed me into this path, like both showed me what was possible in terms of invention, and also was really just like brutally honest about the problems facing the world. Like we've come a long way, but there are very real issues that we as a society have to contend to. And we need people to go in this direction and do it. And so Bert Swersey's belief was you could use invention and innovation to improve the state of the world. And his approach to doing that was to get as many students as possible working in this domain and creating companies. So he didn't say, I'm going to go do this. He said, I'm too old to do that. I'm going to get as many people as possible doing that. And my hope is to continue to see that happening. I know by virtue of being in this class and listening today, it must be of interest with you. And I just want to encourage all of you to consider on this path, acknowledge that it will be really hard, acknowledge that when you do this, you'll have all these folks around you still struggling, but also know that it's really important to the world. So for those of you that are thinking of going in that direction or maybe opening your mind to it, or those of you who already feel committed, I just want to say thank you. And I think we'll wrap there. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you again. So we want to start off a question from Adi.
Yeah, hi. You gave a lot of examples about how you didn't ask for permission, you just acted, and then later on you would ask for forgiveness, right? Has it ever backfired on you over the course of this company?
Okay, that is such a great question, and I'm gonna give you an answer, but I know I'm gonna be wrong because my wife often reminds me that like I'm an optimist and like I edit my past memories I basically have trouble remembering when bad things happen. It's the only way to survive as an entrepreneur. So I don't think it's ever not worked out, but I'm sure that's not the case. And I do want to really stress, and it's, I'm getting old saying this. There's stuff we did at Ecovative that like I regret from a human safety standpoint, and I could actually be giving you an example there that's. We didn't have anything go wrong, but we could have. And so I would say like, this is really, really true in the domain of like leases, legal contracts, rules that don't seem to make any sense, but like, it's not good to do around things with like energized equipment or moving blades.
Shout out from a 1987 alum. I'm just curious if basically the mushrooms there, if they stop living, does that affect the stability of the product, in particular like packaging?
Yes and no, actually. Yes and no. So once the product is inert, so if you kill the mycelium, either through temperature or some other step, you basically have an inert biomaterial that's comprised of cellulose and chitin. So you just have like a dead mushroom body there. It's not particularly like spontaneously combusting. It's kind of like a pine, like a softwood behaves. So in that case, it just sort of will deteriorate either extremely slowly in a building envelope or relatively quickly in a compost pile. It gets really interesting if you leave it alive and dry, so we can dehydrate the material and not kill it. And then you get into this like uncanny valley where like if it gets wet enough, it'll actually reanimate, and if it's got like a fissure, we'll close the fissure. If it doesn't get wet enough, we'll just mold. We actually have a DARPA program to sort of look at using these for like healing structures, like rapidly deployable structures you could put in the field.
Wow.
That for me is like the promise, the end goal of like using biology, and we're just like very far away from that really working today.
Yeah, Eben, you survived for quite a while on your competition winnings. So could you share a bit about maybe your techniques that helped, or how that time period went for you?
Yeah, you were really right. And I thank you for prompting me, because I also want to say that Change the World applications are due. When is it? November
9th.
9th. Thank you. And I actually just reminded when I started the call, that is the first competition we ever won. So we got $1,000 and I believe $250, and I used the $250 to file a provisional patent. That provisional patent turned into our first utility patent. That utility patent spent 7 years being argued before the USPTO Patent Appeal Board because they said it was too broad, that you couldn't patent a whole new class of materials. Ultimately, it was issued with some of the broadest claims in recent history. I was honored in Vienna with Gavin last year at the International Inventors Award alongside the inventor of the lithium-ion battery, not based on commercial success, just based on like what patent examiners think are cool patents. So all I always say is like that competition, like literally started everything for us, like very, very tangibly. And so I would really encourage you all to like write an application. My application was a page with a picture of this little disc and it said organic insulation. You know, put it in your walls. It'll have a lower carbon footprint. Like there was not a lot done at the time. We did parlay that into raising capital. Partially, we started during a recession. So 2007, we started 2008. Capital flows weren't great. Partially, we're making like a pretty bad business pitch to venture capitalists. We're like, hey, do you want to put mushroom insulation in people's walls? Like, it's going to be great. Didn't go well. And so competitions were like our only hope at that time in the capital raising environment. It kept us really lean, but it also helped us get really good at like honing and presenting our ideas. I do have a takeaway from that though, which is I shared with you the ones we won. That was the end. Actually, after we won that, I told Gavin, I'm like, we can't, like, we got to stop, man. Like, we can't go into any more of these. And so we stopped. But and we had a streak running up to that, but we lost a bunch. Like at RPI, we had second and third place finishes. At Colorado, like got the third place. And like what I quickly learned was, and everyone who does this, and you all know this in group projects too, like often the people who win and have like the best looking presentation do not have their stuff together, right? They don't have their shit together. And like they're not the best entrepreneurs. They are not, their products fake. Like everyone knows it when you go out for drinks afterwards. And so I did realize, and it's really important, that like winning competitions is not the same thing as winning a business. And if you get into that and you're doing that, you should be really brutally honest with yourself about which one you're doing. It's okay to go win at a bunch of business plan competitions, but just be aware it's not the same skill set necessarily. And then I would encourage it as a way to bootstrap. So the longer you can defer taking an investor dollar, the better.
Hi, Eben. Thank you for your talk. It was great. Really enjoyed it. So I actually just had a meeting earlier this week with Gavin, and we had a fun conversation about some of the stuff you guys are doing. And he mentioned that early on, you guys had a little bit of a headache with some aspects of your IP. I'm just interested, what tips do you have for IP strategy in general for a startup? But if you have specific advice for biomaterials and the biomaterials industry, I'd be interested to hear that as well.
If you license IP from the university, it can be viewed as a validator, in fact, in some cases. But if you're an undergraduate, and in my case we were, and you do something mostly out of class and like present it, you don't want to get picked up in the IP field. Ultimately, we work that out with RPI. We pay RPI license royalties, which we're happy to do every year, and RPI has been a tremendous supporter of the company. But I will say, and I say this, I've said this to Dr. Jackson many times, it was one of the actually harder things I had to figure out was dealing with the IP policy. And that was, while we were simultaneously squatting in the basement. So, there was a lot of asking for forgiveness on both sides, I guess. In terms of strategy, there are two things you could do. The road advice is just whatever you're doing, just write down what you're doing, right? And that's what you defend, and don't worry about what else is out there. And the other approach is like, go look at the space. So Bert encouraged me to go down to Crystal City, which was where the patent office was. I flew down to, I guess it's Alexandria, Virginia now. I went to the patent office physically. I went into the tombs. I looked for every reference for Mycelium and materials I could find. I met with some patent examiners. And I actually made a mental map of what everyone else had written in my head. And then I used that to write my patent application, which was why it ended up being so broad, why it was so hard to prosecute. And so you could just write down what you're doing, or you can be creative. And the definition for invention is reducing to practice. And simply describing in detail something is considered reducing to practice. So for instance, we have a claim we've never really used on 3D printing. But in 2006, I wrote an example of like, hey, you put down the first level of material, and you put down the second level of material. Just describe a 3D printer with biology. That's defensible. And then I guess lastly, I would say is I think IP is important. I think if you're building a hard tech company, you should invest in it. But doing it in the market's what really matters. Our IP was so broad, we were stopping people from doing this work. That's like the antithesis of the company mission. So on our composite packaging side, we license promiscuously now. Like if you want to just do this, buy a GIY kit for $10 online. That's the grow.bio site. You get a license from us to sell up to 1,000 pounds of material from this like 2-pound kit. So the idea there is like, we don't want to get in your way. And the idea as an entrepreneur is like, protect your ideas, but don't go overkill on it. Most people actually aren't trying to steal your ideas. Most successful businesses are businesses that implemented well, not that protected IP well. So just, do a good job, but don't over-index, I guess, is my feedback.
One of the questions we've been trying to ask all of the speakers or presenters is, if you were a freshman at Rensselaer today, what would motivate you? Is it the same types of things when you were here? Or is there anything that's changed in the world that would change your perspective on what you'd be working on? Or
So I think not a lot would have changed for me in the sense that I still believe biological technology is the greatest vector of the next 100 years. And I think the last 13 years, I think are bearing that out. And but I would say we're still at the beginning. So like, if you compare this to computers, like maybe I graduated in 1970 and it's like 1983, and we're still waiting for like the Macintosh to show up on the scene, right? So like, I guess I would just preface it with like, the opportunity is still really, is wide open, like it's gonna be wide open for a long time. I think plastics and animals are still like two of the biggest problems facing the earth. And then of course, like what we're seeing with COVID and the sort of societal shifts that go around with that. So not just like dealing with filtration, like a practical element of the problem. There's just like a lot of change in the world. And so I would look at where the opportunities and the problems are in everything. We're going to have a rearrangement of society and economies and geopolitical powers effectively. So like, as students and as people in your age group, like you're plugged in. You actually know what the future will look like if you listen to your peers and what you see. And so like, I would just, in addition to those problems in this technology vector, like listen to that.
Hi. So I was wondering, you mentioned that the business pivoted pretty early into its life cycle. So did you and your co-founders have any other ideas to do with the mushrooms and maybe just the biomaterials in general?
Yeah, this has been a big problem, which is just like too many ideas. And I'm really not joking. It really like almost killed the company. So when you have like a new technology that's a platform and you can do lots of stuff, it's like, oh, we can make surfboards. That's really cool. Like stop the foam in the ocean. Surfers love it. It's great PR. So how hard can it be to make a surfboard? Well, it's really freaking hard to make a surfboard, it turns out. Like there's a lot of steps in making a great surfboard. Gavin and I spent some time in California going to surf. I know a lot about surf. I don't surf. I know a lot about surfboard manufacturing. And like you get to the end of it, you're like, this is a $50 million market. Like there actually aren't that many surfboards. Like, what are you doing? And so I would say what we've gotten good at is pivoting towards ideas, and I use these criteria, applications of the technology that are uniquely suited by Mycelium. So if I put my engineer hat on and I can use aluminum and I can use someone else's biotechnology and I can use computers, like, can I think of a better way to do this? Like, would I use my stuff? If the answer isn't like, absolutely, I would do it this way, then like you stay away from it because that's our competitive advantage. Two, you gotta be addressing a big problem, right? It's gotta be something that gets you motivated to come do your job, be excited, feel like you're not wasting time while you're on this planet because it's short. And then the last one is it's gonna be $1 billion plus business because if it's not that big, you can't get the capital you need to do the work you do to scale it to have impact. And the fourth one I'll add to that is this idea of what I call like cultural fit. A16Z calls this zeitgeist fit, but it's basically the idea that like humans are irrational creatures. And things that may make total sense as a business that we should do for the world. If people aren't like kind of like frothing at the mouth about it, like you probably don't want to build a business there. And food is a great example of that. Like plant-based meat's hot. Sure, a lot of you have eaten the Impossible Burger, the Beyond Burger. Some of you may like it. Some of you may think it's cool to not like it, but whatever. It's like all over the place, right? And so like that just is an example of like the cultural headspace that takes up is probably equivalent to the problem issue, but is way bigger than other relative problems. And so like go build, if you can solve that problem somehow, go build in that arena. And I've made the mistake of focusing on other ideas in arenas that were important. There's a good business, but like just no one cared, right? And so like the zeitgeist fit's very important.
I wanted to give you another round of applause if everyone could. It was a great story. Love to have you back at some point in the future to keep telling this. I think it's one of those ones that we have to kind of nurture and curate at Rensselaer, make sure that the next generation keeps hearing it, that innovation in the classroom and the way that Bert was able to motivate lots of students to try out entrepreneurship was really amazing. We try to take up that mantle and try to push it forward, but there weren't many people who did it better than Bert. Bert was just an amazing guy.
He was one of a kind for sure. I will say I'm getting old. I got gray hairs in my beard, so like I'm looking at you folks. Like it's up to you guys. I don't want to be giving this talk in 5 years. One of you should be doing it. I will definitely give this talk in 5 years if it's helpful. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Take care.